Thank you very much to our panel and moderator, Achaleke, for that candid, action-focused dialogue about Africa's path in global trade and investment. I hope you're enjoying this Unstoppable Africa, ladies and gentlemen. Please show us some energy as we continue our sessions this afternoon. If you're enjoying this year's Unstoppable Africa, well, we want you to be a part of it. Why don't you partner with us for next year's Unstoppable Africa 2026? Join us in shaping the future. If you take a look, we have a QR code on the screen that you can scan, share a few details about yourself, and then we'll be in touch with you so we can work together on making Unstoppable Africa 2026 even more impactful. There's the QR code. Scan it. Go ahead, do it. Share your details, and we'll be in touch with you. Now, shifting gears, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to dive into something absolutely vital for Africa's success story, and that is food. Feeding a rapidly growing continent, powering climate-smart innovation, turning African agribusiness into a global growth engine. The journey of food is at the very heart of Africa's future and the world's security. What's driving change? What's driving that change? Well, it's private sector leadership and partnerships that deliver these real results. PepsiCo is out front through its $30 million Godisco Development Fund in South Africa. It's boosting local procurement, promoting regenerative agriculture, and building locally owned businesses. With young programs like She Feeds the World in Uganda and the Pamoja Founders Project empowering young entrepreneurs, PepsiCo is transforming entire communities and supply chains. AGRA, meanwhile, so we've got PepsiCo on the one hand, then AGRA is unlocking growth on African scale, training hundreds of scientists to develop climate-smart crops, building up small and medium-sized agribusiness through its Africa 100 initiative, and rolling out new poultry and nutrition projects that create jobs, spark youth innovation. Their works link smallholders directly to markets, scales up resilient farming, and puts African solution at the center of global food security. So, for our next session, it's our chance to hear firsthand how two bold leaders are shaping the food future. For this exclusive one-on-one conversation at Unstoppable Africa 2025, please welcome two partners, changemakers, and visionaries of Africa's food system resilience. Mr. C.D. Glynn, President of the PepsiCo Foundation and Global Head of Social Impact at PepsiCo, in conversation with Ms. Alice Uweza, President of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone.
It worked.
Unstoppable Africa. We are here. This is great. It's good to see all of you. Bright lights in the big city. I'm C.D. Glynn. I have the honor and privilege of having a great conversation with a fantastic leader who is sort of, let's call it new in role, but not new to this topic or this subject. She's true to this topic and subject, and that's what's really, really important. That this is I think one of the most important conversations for us to have, this food for thought, because Africa and agriculture are almost synonymous in the sense that the largest employer in Africa is the agri-food system. The agricultural food system is critical to Africa's future and us realizing that potential. 60% of the continent of Africa, uncultivated arable land, the potential to feed herself, but also the world. And we have a great leader who I'm gonna have a conversation with who will share some of her thoughts and perspective on critical roles and elements to help realize that potential. Now, I represent the private sector and we play a significant role, but let me turn it over to you, Alice. So Alice, your background, unprecedented, Conservation International, World Wildlife Fund for Nature, now leading AGRA, an African-led, African-based, African-focused global organization, because Africa needs the world and the world needs Africa, Can you talk a little bit about meeting this moment? Why 6 months ago, in March, you took over the helm of an organization that will turn 20 next year? You took over the helm in this moment for the continent, for the world. Why now? Why this role, Alice?
Thank you, CD. So I took over the role of an organization that will turn 20 this year from an organization that had just turned 60. And the Worldwide Fund for Nature, in its Living Planet report, which it produces every 2 years, it had just come out, and I think for the first time in that report, we had acknowledged that the work we were doing on conservation on its own was not going to be enough to really bend the curve, and that we needed action on food systems, action on finance, and action on energy. So the timing could not have been better for me to go to Agra, because I knew by going to Agra I was going to be tackling one of the most important areas that we had identified. And it was important that knowing that the food systems and the role that the food systems play in addressing the 3 planetary challenges: climate change, nature loss, and income inequality. So the timing was right, and that's why I was encouraged.
The timing was right, and you are the right person in the job at this right time to really realize that dream of an unstoppable Africa. So the timing was right for me as well, because often I spent a lot of my career working in the nonprofit sector, working in philanthropy with the Rockefeller Foundation, where I had the opportunity to work really extensively with AGRA based in Nairobi, Kenya. And for the past almost 5 years now, I've been with the private sector. And you mentioned the private sector as an investor, the private sector as a driver of innovation, the private sector as really a key to partnerships. And at PepsiCo, so I know some of you are thinking, okay, this guy, the PepsiCo company, the PepsiCo Foundation, why is the head of a soda company like on this agri-food conversation? PepsiCo is the US's largest food and beverage company, one of the largest in the world. And so when you think about crops like potatoes, crops like corn, crops like oats, I also want you to think about the brands that bring some of those to life. So you have Lay's potato chips, you have Doritos, you have Simba chips in South Africa, you have Quaker Oats. On the beverage side, you know Pepsi and Gatorade and Mirinda and 7-Up. So in terms of food systems, we manufacture, we source, we operate really locally. And we take those African potatoes and we create great products such as Lay's potato chips or Simba. We take that corn and we're creating great products, whether it's Doritos or Cheetos, in Africa, for Africans and for the world. And the same thing as it relates to oats. So the private sector plays a great role in sourcing, manufacturing, distributing, and providing great products that can be sold and acquired around the world. But this is from African soil. So talk a little bit, Alice, about how AGRA, and you in particular, want to and do leverage the private sector to be a greater contributor to African agriculture, but also global products that really feed and nurture and supply the world.
Thank you. I'm glad you gave that example. And it's already happening. Today probably some of you had chocolate, and we know that 2/3 of the world's supply of cocoa comes from West Africa. And we know that these farmers supply the robins that come to Europe and are in the roasters and quality control teams, package them and transform them into chocolate. So the private sector, it's already our goods coming in and meeting the private sector. You have shea butter as well, 16 million women in Burkina Faso and Ghana collecting that shea butter, ends up into creams here. You have avocado in cosmetic applications, you have cocoa, so many examples coming in. And so there's already a link between the raw material and the processing. So the private sector plays a very, very important role in that even when we produce early generation seed, it is the private sector that multiplies that seed and makes sure that it reaches farms. So AGRA partners with the private sector in that respect, in that even though we support farmers to increase productivity, whatever they produce has to find a market, and it has to be processed. and it has to go to the industry, but also there has to be infrastructure. There's pricing. There's a role that is played by the private sector, and we see the private sector as an important player in the work that we do.
I appreciate that, and we definitely see a signature role in being, obviously, providing the market access, providing the level of investment all across the continent. At PepsiCo, we have large manufacturing operations in South Africa, in Ethiopia, in Nigeria, countries that are thriving in agricultural productivity, and where we as a global company are investing locally, local sourcing, local content development, a number of all of our employees. In South Africa alone, almost over 15,000 employees in South Africa working on South African value chains, in value chains such as wheat, and so you might know breakfast cereal. Some of you had breakfast this morning. Maybe you had Quaker Oats. That's PepsiCo. Maybe yesterday when you were home, you had Weetabix. And so these are African products that are grown with African crops that we are transforming to help feed African lives, but also to feed the world. But we know that the private sector invests with a mindset with risk at the heart of what we think about. We think about we need an enabling environment. We need markets where we can grow and thrive, where we can invest in African lives and livelihoods and smallholder farmers. That policy enabling environment is something that we don't navigate on our own. We need partnerships with groups like AGRA. So you and I were together in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia in July for the UN Food Systems Summit. And I shared some information about how PepsiCo is investing now almost $100 million in Ethiopia, in the Ethiopian agricultural value chain, in crops like potatoes, in crops like corn, and now increasingly in sunflower oil. Now, the reality is that sunflower oil is a substitute for palm oil, and we can do so much more in Ethiopia if we have an enabling environment to drive sunflower oil. But this is policy needs that we don't control on our own. So we've talked to AGRA. We came to you, and you created an approach that's really unique. It's a consortium approach that you take with policy, but also with the private sector. Share a little bit more about how you help the private sector be able to invest locally so that we can actually grow our business, but also improve the lives of Africans.
Yeah, thank you. You know, without policy, you cannot get to scale. And for AGRA, when we started almost 20 years ago, we started with the belief that as long as we provided seeds to the farmer, the right seed to the farmer would be able to increase productivity. But soon we realized that some of that seed was landing on degraded land. And so we needed to have a program that also worked on soil health. We needed to have extension farmers. We needed to provide support to the farmer on drought-resistant varieties and where to put what. So agronomy and extension was important. Markets were also important because we knew that once we had given the farmer the seed and they would produce enough, where will that surplus go? So we needed work on markets. But importantly, we needed to scale, and we cannot get to scale without policy. So we have strong work on policy, because otherwise everything you do remains as a pocket of success. So we needed policy. And we've had some good examples. So in Ethiopia is a good example you talked about, where we really needed to increase mechanization. In order to get to scale, you need to have mechanization. But the government was taxing mechanization.
The government
was taxing.
There was taxing mechanization.
Yes, okay. There was a tax. So the work we did then was to lobby the government to reduce that tax on mechanization to allow more mechanization to come in. There are many, many other examples where we've really worked on policy, whether it is about providing e-vouchers for fertilizer in Nigeria and other countries. In Kenya in particular, there was one where we had to lobby a regulation really just about the size of the bag of potatoes that made a difference when the potatoes are taken to market, the sizes of that bag and how they can sell those potatoes. It made a better price for farmers, better sustainability. So policy plays a strong role in terms of the signal, but also in terms of getting to scale. And just to also add that Africa has its comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, CADAP, as you know, which now we are really working to make sure that every country is domesticated that program, has a national agriculture investment plan, is able to work with the private sector like you to attract investments into the sector.
You know, thank you for that. And the realities of, we talk about mechanization, we talk about moving away from the hoe and the shovel and the ox-driven tilling of the land to mechanization, and to hear that you've been able to work with government to take the tax off of mechanization so that we can look at transformational agriculture is critically important. So thank you for AGRA, and thank you for that leadership. When we think about agriculture from a business standpoint at PepsiCo, we talk about being positive. We all have heard the phrase that business can be a positive force for good, and PepsiCo wants to be PepsiCo positive. And so we're very clear in terms of our positive contributions. We want to be positive in our agriculture, and we're talking about taking 10 million acres of land, our entire agricultural footprint, and making it more regenerative. So regenerative agriculture. We talk about sustainable sourcing and sustainable agriculture. And Alice, we talk about inclusive agriculture. So that means backing those who really at the heart of African agriculture, which are smallholder farmers and particularly women. But increasingly, we see this inclusivity being critical with this population that has 70% of the entire continent. And who's that? Who's this 70% of the entire continent? These are young people. These are young people. So the youth in agriculture, and we've heard it. We've heard the average age of a farmer is more than 60 years old. But how do we think about this untapped resource of 70% of African population to have them be more interested, more innovative, more included in agriculture? What are your thoughts? What is AGRA's perspective on youth in agriculture?
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about youth and women, because let's talk about first that women are the backbone of agriculture. I think they're the biggest population.
They're the backbones of our families, too.
Exactly.
I say this on stage because as a married man with 3 daughters, women definitely run the house in my life right now.
Yeah, and I come from a family of 6. I guess 6 girls.
6 girls.
Women are the backbone of agriculture. We see that. And most often haven't always been at the table when decisions are being made, haven't always had the titles, the access to land, and yet they're the biggest providers. So the work that we do really is to make sure that women are included, that we also support women-owned businesses. Every year we give out the Women Agripreneur of the Year Award.
Women Agripreneur of the Year
Award.
I love
support women-owned businesses. And this year, actually, the Africa Food Prize, we gave it to 2 women. One who was working on cassava, another one was working on indigenous crops. We're seeing a lot of innovation from women, and we need to recognize it. We need to make sure that there is insurance so that their businesses are insured so that they can access finance, because sometimes they're being seen as a high-risk group. So we need to make sure that we take away all those risks and that they get the financing. Now, the youth, you rightly said, 70% of Africa's population. We just came back from the Africa Food System Summit in Dakar, where you know, that is Africa's youngest president. The youth was the big theme of that session. We saw innovation.
Wow.
Serious innovation by the youth. And we also gave out what we call the Go-Getters Awards to the youth. The youth are already innovating. They are. But what they need is our support to give them, support them to take those innovations to market. We need the private sector like you, and we need other funders to really support them. AGRA has a partnership with the MasterCard Foundation, which is really working to ensure that we create jobs in the agri-food sector. And it's not just jobs, it is dignified and well-meaning jobs. And we're really measuring those wages to make sure that they're dignified. So we're doing all we can, and we want to work with everybody and partner with everybody to make sure that when we say Africa is unstoppable, it is actually the youth that are unstoppable.
I love it. Africa's unstoppable. Why? Because the youth and the women are unstoppable. Yes. Love that, Alice. I think we're in good stead with knowing that AGRA is at the helm, encouraging the private sector to continue to invest. Africa as a continent in terms of agri-food systems being critically important. This is a really important moment for all of us to think about not only organizations, but also the people on the ground to improve their lives and livelihoods in so many ways. We're in New York City. We know there's a lot of concert venues here, and we know that there was a famous singer who talked about the youth. So Whitney Houston, who probably was at Madison Square Garden at one point in time, she said, "I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way." So I think with AGRA, with the private sector, we're going to let the youth lead the way in agriculture. These are people who are digital natives. They start with digital literacy in ways that can transform African agriculture. So we're really grateful for that. Maybe one final point, as AGRA thinks about innovation and thinks about digitization, what role, we know every conversation right now is about AI and digitization, and the African continent is, as we've said before, transforming and leapfrogging. What role does digitization play in AGRA's, maybe your vision, your mission, and how you're looking at agriculture with a digital future in mind?
Yeah, let me first talk about AI, because I was amazed 2 weeks ago when we were in Dakar and there was AI extension advisory being displayed, where a farmer could just come in and ask a question and get a response back in their local language. That's what AI is doing. AI is giving extension in local language.
So AI in Wolof.
AI in Wolof, or,
In
AI, or
Senegal.
for that matter, AI in every other country, in Luganda, or in Swahili, for that matter. AI is here to stay. AI is transforming, and we are going to have AI advisory, which is really good. In terms of digitization, I've also seen amazing examples. When I was in, I think it was Ghana, I met, normally some of the challenges our farmers face is that they have the product, but they don't know who needs the product. They don't know where the dealer is. Now we have this digital, it was called Grow For Me, where you have it on your phone, and you can click on and it can tell you, so-and-so is looking for this many sacks of potatoes. So you pack it wherever you are, and we'll come and pick it for you.
So the information asymmetry that we saw before, where people were growing with no knowledge of the market, the market was looking for crops, not knowing where those crops existed, that's been...
Digitization has solved that. You can go online and you can do that. You can go online, and what I really also liked is that they are using their crops as collateral to get loans through a warehouse receipt system that is also online. I saw this in Ethiopia, I saw this in Ghana as well. So the digitization is very important, because with that mobile phone, you just click and say, rent a tractor, or sell your goods, or find an extension service. It is so important that digitization is the future.
It definitely is the future. I think the future's in good hands, Alice, with you at the helm of AGRA. I feel confident and privileged of being in a company that's investing in Africa, African ideas, African innovation. We talk about being local, we talk about being leading because we're PepsiCo, but we also talk about being lasting. And we're talking about lasting change and transformation so Africa can be unstoppable and Africa can realize its potential with agriculture. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. Africa is unstoppable.
Africa is unstoppable. Thank you.